Welcome, I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the global top stories. Russian President Vladimir Putin orders his forces to stop all military activity in Ukraine, announcing an Easter truce through Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kiev will respect the truce, but accuses Moscow of already violating it. Ukraine and Russia conduct a swap of over 500 prisoners of war on Saturday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says 277 Ukrainian service members return home, while Kiev hands over 246 Russian prisoners. The US Supreme Court temporarily blocks the Trump administration from deporting a group of Venezuelan migrants under a rarely used wartime law. The Trump government urges the court to lift the order. Israeli forces continue striking the Gaza Strip, with 54 people reported killed in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Hamas says the fate of an Israeli hostage remains unknown after his guard's body is found following an Israeli airstrike. Iran and the United States agree to begin drafting a framework for a potential nuclear deal. After talks a top US official calls very good progress, President Trump threatens military action if Iran doesn't swiftly accept a new deal to halt nuclear weapons development. Thousands of anti-Trump protesters take to the streets in communities small and large on Saturday. The demonstrations coincide with the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War. Houthi-run media reports 13 deadly airstrikes in Yemen. At least 3 people are killed and 4 others injured in the latest US strikes on Sana'a city districts. Reports say a gunman kills at least 56 people earlier this week in Nigeria's Benue state. The death toll is updated after initial underreporting following the visit to the scene by a state governor. We start in the Middle East, where at least 54 Palestinians have been killed in a new wave of Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, with attacks hitting Gaza City, Khan Yunis, Beit Lahiya and Al-Biraz refugee camp. In Khan Yunis alone, 11 people were killed when Israeli forces targeted tents sheltering displaced families. The strikes come amid one of the deadliest phases of the war, with nearly 1,700 Palestinians killed since Israel ended a temporary ceasefire on March the 18th and resumed its assault. Meanwhile, Hamas has released a third video of Israeli hostage Elkana Bohbot, who was taken during the October 7th attacks. Israel has condemned the footage as part of a psychological warfare campaign aimed at pressuring the government. In a separate statement, Hamas also said that it has lost contact with the person responsible for guarding Israeli-American soldier Edan Alexander, who was also taken as hostage in October. The group confirmed that a guard assigned to Alexander was killed in a recent Israeli airstrike, but the fate of the 21-year-old dual citizen remains unknown. Alexander's father, Adi Alexander, says he remains hopeful that his son is still alive. Speaking at a gathering outside Tel Aviv City Hall, he urged the United States to take direct action to help recover the remaining hostages. Families of the captives are continuing to press Israeli leaders for answers and a diplomatic solution to bring their loved ones home. In a national address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he has ordered the military to increase pressure on Hamas. He has vowed that Israel would continue fighting until victory, blaming Hamas's rejection of a recent truce proposal for the renewed escalation. Netanyahu's comments came as protests erupted across the country, with demonstrators clashing with police in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, demanding a deal to bring the hostages back and to end the war. We are joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao, Fellow at the Hudson Institute in Tokyo, Japan, to discuss this further. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. This has been an extremely long process. In terms of international humanitarian law, how will today's escalation likely be assessed? And what mechanisms are there to hold anyone accountable with these 52 people being killed today in the Gaza Strip?
Is view from the counterinsurgency operation in the past or view from the military operation in the dense populated area, unfortunately, it could happen very often. Because, for example, in case of the Israel operation in Gaza, one estimate said 40,000 people was killed in the military operation. In the dense populated area, 2 million population is live in that place. But when we compare the military operation in the past in dense populated area, for example, the March 10th US bombing to Tokyo, in this case, even if the one night, 100,000 people was killed. So compare with this, 40,000 people killed in 1 year is not so many. So view from these numbers, we cannot say that this is genocide, but at the same time, the dense populated area, it is true that it is unavoidable to kill the many civilians. So how to avoid such kind of situation is very important, serious matter. Of course, taking the hostage and try to negotiation is a bad thing, it is true. But at the same time, the collateral damage should be avoided in the military operation. That is a very serious issue.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, obviously there is repeated emphasis that Israel want these hostages released. How do you analyse Benjamin Netanyahu's military strategy along with the importance of having these hostages released? We've obviously heard that Edan Alexander's guard has been found dead after an Israeli airstrike. So how do you assess the balance of trying to keep these hostages safe, which Israel say is the most important, to the escalating military operations of the Israeli government?
I believe that because of they cannot find alternative methods, they continue the military operation, I think. So pressure to the Hamas and the people around Hamas to release a hostage is one kind of the measure of the forceful persuasion with Hamas, because Hamas is terrorist, and that's why Israel cannot negotiate, obviously, but anyway, they have already done through the Qatar or through the Egypt's mediation. So, but this negotiation has failed to release all of the hostage. Of course, partially they have succeeded to get back, but still Hamas maintained hostages. So under such kind of situation, they need to find alternative method, but except a military operation to bomb Hamas with the collateral damage, without except this method, they cannot find alternative methods. That's why this is the only solution they believe, I believe.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, finally, the US has been asked by these hostage families to take direct action. Realistically, what options, diplomatic or military, does the Trump administration have? We know he's a staunch supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel.
Trump administration seriously want to solve this issue because they want to concentrate their resources to the counter-China strategy. And through the process, if the Iran possesses a nuclear weapon, this is also the problem, because the Saudi and Israel need to publish their nuclear weapon if they have. And Iran's move is threat to the freedom of the communication and economic project, India, Middle East, Europe corridor is also rely on the security in the Middle East. All of these issues relate to the U.S. interest. So U.S. really want to solve, but Trump administration has only one card, unpredictability. So that's why the first read, President Trump said, you will go to hell if you do not release the hostage. This is intimidation style. And but it has worked temporarily, but only temporarily. Now his threat, intimidation hasn't worked well. So that's why they cannot find alternative solutions. So that's why they try to negotiate with Hamas directly, but that was failed. Now they try to negotiate with Iran directly to prevent Iran possession of the nuclear weapon. Yes. That is another solution. And they try to talk with Saudi Arabia also. That is another solution. But still, this negotiation hasn't succeeded well. So how to find a special method to solve this issue is a matter of concern all of the people in the world, I think.
Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. We move now to Europe, where President Vladimir Putin ordered a unilateral Easter ceasefire in Ukraine and ordered Russian forces to end hostilities. Let's listen in to what he said.
Руководствуясь гуманитарными соображениями, сегодня с 18:00 часов до 00 часов с воскресенья на понедельник российская сторона объявляет пасхальное перемирие. Приказываю на этот период остановить все боевые действия. Исходим из того, что украинская сторона последует.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and Moscow Mayor Sergei Sorovyin attended an Easter service led by Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who is a strong supporter of Putin and advocates for the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, air raid sirens went off in Kiev and Kharkiv on the evening of April the 19th, just hours after Putin announced a surprise one-day ceasefire in Ukraine for Easter. The sirens in Kiev lasted around 15 minutes with no attacks reported. In Kharkiv, the sirens sounded 3 hours after the ceasefire was supposed to begin. In Kiev, residents attended an Easter mass, staying inside the church due to the city's midnight curfew. At St. Michael's Monastery, worshippers held the first part of their ceremony outside, with church officials leading a procession before gathering for prayers. Let's hear what the residents from Russia and Ukraine had to say about Easter ceasefire.
Я считаю, что оно ни к чему не приведет. Пасхальное перемирие не приведет к миру. Потому что Украина все равно не будет соблюдать эти договоренности. Так же, как они сейчас продолжают бомбить эти наши энергообъекты. Понимаете? Мы прекратили вроде бы как, а они как продолжают, так и продолжают.
Розумієте, ця людина не договороспособна, він не вміє домовлятися, він вміє тільки силою брати, він ніколи не піде на домовленість. Так, як ми хочемо, він хоче так, як він хоче. Не буде перемир'я. Дуже жаль. Ночі ми чекаємо в Україні, а особливо в Києві, прильоти ракет. Тому перемир'я не буде.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated on social media that despite the Kremlin ceasefire declaration, Russian artillery fire continued. We stay in the region now, where in a significant development, Ukraine and Russia have conducted a prisoner swap, exchanging over 500 individuals. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that 277 Ukrainian service personnel had returned from Russian captivity. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry reported that 246 of its servicemen were handed over by Ukraine, along with 31 injured prisoners and 15 wounded Russian soldiers. All Russian prisoners are now in Belarus, awaiting transfer back to Russia. Footage shared by Ukraine's Human Rights Commissioner Dmytro Lubinets showed Ukrainian soldiers, many wrapped in their national flag, gathered in a wooded area before sitting on the tarmac and chanting patriotic slogans. Zelensky added that since the start of the war, 4,552 Ukrainians, both military and civilian, have been returned. Both sides expressed gratitude to the United Arab Emirates for facilitating the exchange. We are now joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, located in Vigan, the Philippines, to discuss this further. Thank you very much, Jim, for joining us. This Easter ceasefire has obviously been declared today by Vladimir Putin, agreed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also. Zelensky has already accused Vladimir Putin of breaking this ceasefire. What does this say about the trust on both sides of this conflict?
Well, I think that by now it's obvious to everyone that Putin's so-called ceasefire over Easter Sunday is merely a pretext. And I think it's a pretext because just yesterday there was a statement by Trump and by Secretary of State Rubio that indicated that they were basically thinking about withdrawing from the peace process. And I believe that this is basically what Putin is trying to do to keep Trump on board.
Jim, could this Easter truce be a prelude to genuine negotiations, or is it merely a propaganda tool for the Kremlin?
I think it's the latter. I think it's merely a propaganda tool for the Kremlin, and as I said, I think he's trying to offer something. Again, Putin has offered no flexibility whatsoever. His terms for peace are essentially that there regime change in Kiev, and that essentially that Ukraine surrender to Russia. And so, yeah, it's a propaganda ploy.
Jim, what leverage, if any, does Kiev gain from this large prisoner of war swap of the war, and why does Moscow appear to have agreed to it in this particular moment?
Well, first and foremost, it's a good thing that the prisoner swap took place. Some 250 Ukrainian soldiers will be able to go home and spend Easter with their families, and be out of those prison camps, and that's got to be a good thing. Apart from that, I'm not sure.
Jim, what do you make of the state that this war is in right now? Obviously, you've said previously about the fact that the Trump administration has said through Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, that if negotiations don't move forward, the US might pull out as mediators. What do you think of the current state of the conflict and the diplomatic negotiations are going on? Are we any closer to seeing a ceasefire, do you think?
Well, given the fact that that Ukraine is a democratic nation, that they're trying to maintain freedom and sovereignty and independence, they must fight on, regardless of whether they're being supported by the United States or the European Union or whoever. They have no choice. For Russia, this is a war of choice. If they want to end the war, all they have to do is stop the fighting permanently and withdraw from the areas of Ukraine that they've occupied. It's very simple, actually.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure. We now move on. The United States and Iran made progress in a second round of high-stakes talks on Tehran's nuclear program on Saturday and agreed to meet again next week. The Oman-mediated talks in Rome lasted for around 4 hours. Tehran's top diplomat, Abbas Araghchi, declared it a good meeting that yielded progress and stated that they managed to reach a better understanding on a series of principles and goals. Let's take a look at what the Iranian foreign minister had to say.
در ادامه جلسه گذشته این بار هم جلسه خوبی بود و میتونم بگم که رو به جلو هست مذاکرات. ما این بار موفق شدیم در خصوص یک سری اصول و اهداف به یک تفاهم بهتری برسیم و نهایتاً قرار شد که مذاکرات ادامه پیدا بکنه و وارد مرحله.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Email Bakwai said that the parties have agreed to resume indirect talks at a technical level over the next few days and subsequently continue at the level of 2 senior negotiators next Saturday on April the 26th. The Foreign Ministry of Oman, which is mediating the nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran, said the two sides were seeking an agreement that guarantees the Islamic Republic does not possess nuclear weapons. Oman also said that the third round would be in Muscat, returning to the site of the first talks a week ago. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has affirmed his commitment to preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, declaring he would not waver in that effort. Here's what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
אני מחויב למנוע מאיראן נשק גרעיני. אני לא מוותר על זה, אני לא מרפה מזה, ואני לא נסוג.
Staying in the region, the United States has launched a fresh wave of airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. At least 3 people were killed and 4 injured in strikes on El Sana's Al-Tara, Bani Mata and Al-Safia districts. The US also hit Hodeida's port and airport with 13 airstrikes, just days after a deadly raid on the Ras Isa oil port that killed at least 80 and wounded over 150. CENTCOM says the attacks aim to weaken the Houthis' fuel supply and revenue. The strikes follow repeated Houthi attacks on the Red Sea shipping, which the group claims are in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Despite mounting casualties, the Houthis have vowed to continue their operations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he is gravely concerned by the rising death toll. We now move over to the United States, where thousands of protesters across the US took to the streets on Saturday, voicing opposition to President Donald Trump's policies. The protests focus on deportations, government firings and the ongoing conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine. Demonstrators were held in Washington, New York City, Chicago and other cities across the United States. Outside the White House, protesters chanted "Trump must go now," calling for action on deportations and solidarity with federal workers fired under the Trump administration. Since his inauguration, President Trump, along with his ally Elon Musk, has overseen the firing of over 200,000 federal workers and efforts to dismantle key agencies. The administration has also targeted universities and detained foreign students, further fueling nationwide protests. This marks the 2nd consecutive day of nationwide demonstrations since Trump took office. Let's listen in to what some of the protesters had to say.
Due process. That's the first thing they come for, is to take away our due process. And if you folks think here today that you're safe, they're just coming for the weak, the powerless, the students, the immigrants. They're not. They're coming for anybody who stands up against them. Law firms, universities, anybody who resists, they come for. So do not be misled, do not be mistaken. This is happening here in our country today. Fascism. Trump is taking Joe Stalin's playbook and using it. So let's not kid ourselves. Let's be real about the task at hand, about what's going on. Thank you.
I think that people are rising up all over this country for good reasons, and I am here to be part of that uprising and to protest all the, especially the deportations, the grabbing of people who are here legally and legitimately and throwing them into jail for no good.
We stay in the United States, where the Supreme Court has temporarily blocked the deportation of Venezuelan migrants under a wartime-era law. The Trump administration had moved to deport dozens of accused gang-tied immigrants using the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. The American Civil Liberties Union filed an emergency request arguing that the migrants were denied judicial review. The court responded, halting removals until further notice. Conservative justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito dissented, but the White House, while defending its immigration crackdown, has not signaled that it would defy the ruling. The case highlights growing tensions between the courts and President Trump, who has deported over 200 migrants to El Salvador, including one man admitted to be wrongly removed. Let's turn to the Indo-Pacific, where North Korea denounced on Sunday US President Donald Trump's recent order to ease weapons exports and called the decision war escalation measures. According to reports, the Korean Central News Agency said that while the US is pretending to be a mediator by recommending dialogue and negotiation, on the other hand, it is continuously handling all kinds of weapons of mass destruction to encourage warmongers and to further expand and prolong the war. This comes as Trump has been pushing for peace negotiations between Kiev and Moscow and signed an executive order to ease exports of US weapons until April the 9th. Let's move over to the African continent, where gunmen killed at least 56 people earlier this week in central Nigeria's Benue state. An official in the governor's office said on Saturday, revising an earlier death toll of 17. Police report that the suspected gunman invaded the area overnight, sparking a violent clash with security forces. As the attackers were being repelled, they shot at unsuspecting farmers. This comes after a simultaneous attack in a neighbouring area that left 12 more dead. Clashes between nomadic cattle herders and farmers over land have been common in central Nigeria, and recent attacks on nearby Plateau State have claimed over 100 lives. Let's move to South Asia, where tens of thousands of Afghans have been expelled from Pakistan this month, with the United Nations reporting that more than 80,000 have left ahead of an April the 30th deadline. The Pakistani government has accelerated its campaign to deport undocumented Afghans, stating that it can no longer cope with the burden. Taliban officials say up to 2 million may be forced out in the coming months. In response, Afghanistan's Prime Minister has strongly condemned what he called Pakistan's unilateral measures, warning they are complicating efforts for a coordinated repatriation. He urged Islamabad to facilitate a dignified return of Afghan refugees. Yesterday, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar travelled to Kabul for talks. His visit aimed to ease rising tensions, as Pakistan has accused Kabul of harbouring terrorists behind deadly attacks. The Taliban has denied those charges, but the expulsions continue. Pakistan's officials have insisted that the deadline stands, with no extensions or leniency. Meanwhile, returning families, many of whom have lived their entire lives in Pakistan, are saying that they are being forced to abandon their homes, belongings and future. Amid rising tensions, the mass deportations have put enormous strain on Afghanistan's infrastructure and on its economy, as thousands arrive daily to a country still reeling from years of war. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.